In a recent episode, we took a trip back to the 1950s into the works of a man by the name of Frank Tinsley. Due to the interest shown from that first video, we'll be doing it again this week as we take a look at probably the most insane tank concept I have ever seen. Join me as we take a look at the crazy vehicle known as the Baby Assault Tank.
Throughout history, there have been countless tanks, all designed to kill. But not all have been a success. What happened to the ones that never made it, and why did they fail? My name is ConeOfArc. Join me as we journey through time, uncovering failed projects and forgotten creations in Cursed by Design.
Today's episode is once again brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is a community-driven learning platform that allows you to develop new skills, unleash your creativity, or even improve on an existing passion. A great class to follow up this video would be Concept Art Drawing Imaginary Worlds by Ira Marks. If you do choose to check that one out, let me know in the comments if it helped you improve your creations. Skillshare is offering the first 1,000 of my viewers who click the link below a full month of Skillshare completely free. So if you want to give it a try, check the description and grab your free month before they're gone. Be sure to let me know what you learn in the comments or on my Discord server. Thanks so much to them for supporting my content, and now let's get into today's video. Although the idea of a submersible tank is equal parts insane and fascinating, it doesn't hold a candle to the absolute acid trip of some of the other tank concepts from the 20th century. Out of all the ones I've seen over my years of learning about tanks, the Baby Assault Tank stands as probably the single craziest piece of machinery ever devised. Although it might not be quite as crazy as some of the non-tank concepts like the plan to use man-made geysers to transport water to Southern California, for the low price of $300,000 per station, you too can own a water blaster capable of putting your neighbor's super soaker to shame with its capability to shoot water at 400 miles per hour. Being honest though, I think what killed that particular idea wasn't the fact that no one in their right mind would see it as a viable means of transporting water, but rather because they decided to refer to it as California's Big Squirt, which just looks like something you'd find in the adult section of the store. Terrible jokes aside though, today's topic isn't about the California adult entertainment industry. This is a tank channel, and it's finally time to stop blueballing all of you and get into the subject of our video. Just like last time, I'll be reading the original article first, then we'll go through and dissect exactly what it is my boy Frank was suggesting. We are living in a machine age and our wars have become mechanical, but it's still the muddy, tired infantrymen who must storm the enemy stronghold in bloody assault. In some cases, the tactical situation and nature of the terrain make this necessary. In many others, however, the brunt of the attack could just as well be absorbed by light, heavily armed machines. Why then can't we send in a first wave of baby assault tanks and use our irreplaceable GIs for the less hazardous chore of mopping up? The primary consideration for such a tank is mobility. Our baby battle buggy must be able to scuttle rapidly over rough ground, scale steep banks, and bridge shell holes and trenches. In the design shown here, the armored hull is supported by 3 independently sprung track gears which are joined to the body by long, self-leveling legs. In order to span wide gullies, the front leg telescopes and is capable of feeling around for a foothold like an insect's antenna. It can be raised or lowered and swing in a 180-degree arc. It also can be extended and steered. While all these movements are taking place, a jack is necessary to give temporary support to the apex of the triangle. This can be of the hydraulic type, retractable and operated from within the hull. Some sort of rear buttress is needed to prevent our buggy from tumbling over backwards while scaling extra steep slopes and banks. Again, we borrow from the insect world. A universally mounted tail feeler similar to the front rig does the trick. Extended and lowered on uphill grades, it props up our buggy like the tucked down tail of an insect on a twig. The hull is cigar-shaped, 12 feet long, swelling to a 3.5-foot maximum diameter. It is capped by a revolving turret in which the armament is mounted. This raises its overall height to 7 feet, a minimum for clear vision in high grass or bushy terrain. The width of the main tracks is 12 feet and the machine's overall length can be extended from 24 to 32 feet. The 2-man crew consists of a driver and gunner. The former sits in a bucket seat in the nose and drives by means of 2 miniature control sticks, one for the main tractors, the other for the nose unit. Other controls, like those found in the cab of an electric power shovel, permit him to manipulate the telescopic nose and tail gear. The gunner sits behind and above the driver in a hanging seat that revolves with the turret. The latter is mounted on a circular track with a full 360-degree traverse and is fitted with ear-like extensions on either side. These are really smaller turrets which revolve in a vertical plane to elevate or depress the guns mounted in them. I hope you now understand why I made such a big deal about this concept being the most insane tank I have ever seen. Nevertheless, let's discuss what exactly is being proposed. We get a more in-depth look at the vehicle in this article compared to the previous one we discussed, including a detailed cutaway of the internals. To start with, we'll look at the overall hull. I'm really not sure how this design can be called a baby assault tank when the overall length of up to 32 feet puts it just shy of passing the Char 2C. The hull itself is cylindrical and contains 2 crew. Unfortunately, armor thickness is left out of the description, but given the design of the arms, I can't imagine it would have had very much. With the shape of the hull being fairly rounded though, I could see it being resistant to most, if not all, small arms fire, with only things like anti-tank guns or RPGs being a major threat to it. We'll get more into the obvious issues with the design later though, since we have more to unpack about the concept first. Situated behind the commander gunner, we can see the engine compartment, as well as what looks to be ammunition and a fire extinguisher. Below him is a fuel tank, and to his side is a large door. In front of him sits the driver, who actually looks to be in a fairly comfortable position aside from the extendable jack between his shins. Above him is an escape hatch, and to the front he also has a viewport as well as a pair of large headlights on the whole front. With the main hull covered, we now move into the really wacky portion of this vehicle. Starting at the front, we have a set of tracks powered by an electric drive and a complex strut system. On either side, a similar set of tracks stick out, giving the tank a 12-foot overall width. These rear tracks would also likely act as the primary suspension for the tank, with the struts acting as giant leaf springs to stabilize the hull. At the very back of the tank, we have a final set of struts leading to a so-called tail, which consists of a pair of wheels for steadying the tank on steep slopes and other obstacles. This would also have the ability to be lifted if not needed. Both the front and rear struts were also fitted with teeth to slice through wire. Last but not least, let's talk about the turret on this monstrosity. The design actually somewhat reminds me of the early French tanks, having a very similar overall shape. The armament on these things is on a whole nother level though. On one side, we once again see a recoilless cannon, leading me to think Frank Tinsley was a big fan of this style of armament. Next to that is a pair of 30 cal machine guns in what looks to be a traditional style mount. Then on the opposite side, the tank not only has a flamethrower but also features a breech-loading mortar. As if the commander doesn't already have enough, he would also get a large periscope, a radio set, and another escape hatch above his head. Now that we've seen how this tank was to be built, let's talk about if there's any merit to this design. The obvious answer is of course no. There are so many flaws to this design that it would probably make the Valiant look like a marvel of engineering. Just looking at the wacky track system, I have to ask how on earth you would get power to the electric drives without leaving wires exposed to the enemy to just slice through. Assuming they found a way to shield these, you would still run into issues with mines. You could likely get away with a few attacks with these, but once the enemy catches on, you'd better expect that any place the tanks would be able to attack from would be absolutely covered in mines. Normal tanks are already at risk for these damaging their suspension, but the baby assault tank having its entire drive system crammed into the tracks as well would likely result in extremely costly repairs. This is before we even consider the weight of the hull having to be supported by relatively thin struts too. I also have to wonder how well the jack would work to cross obstacles, although I do think it could be made to work. Moving back to the armament, my opinion is mixed. On one hand, the armament is designed in a way where it doesn't place multiple breaches into the space the gunner would be operating in, which is good, but on the other hand, reloading them would probably be an absolute nightmare. I assume the main weapon would not be the cannons, but more likely would be the 2 machine guns, since those would be far easier to reload and operate, with the flamethrower also being used frequently. The method of elevation is certainly interesting, with the larger armaments being mounted in what are essentially smaller turrets on either side of the main turret, giving them a much wider firing arc, but how on earth would you sight them on target? Without the technology for digital sights, I tend to think these would be aimed purely by eye. Hopefully some sort of indicator to show where the barrels were pointing could be fitted for the gunner though, since otherwise friendly fire becomes a much bigger threat. I noticed many comments on my last video which were bashing the idea of a recoilless rifle in a closed turret, and I can understand why. However, I think the criticism is a bit misplaced since there are several real-world examples of tanks using the same type of weapon from within a closed turret. All the designers would need to do is ensure there is some way to vent the backblast either forward, like the Germans did with the Sturmtiger, or have some sort of opening in the back, like on the T-114. That being said, I cannot as easily defend the choice of going with the two-man crew for a vehicle like this. The commander, like with the early tanks, would be responsible for so many tasks just to direct the driver and identify threats that I don't know where he would find the time to reload the 5 weapons at his disposal. That being said, it's interesting to consider that somewhat similar designs were actually produced. These may have been far less crazy than the baby assault tank, but vehicles like the T-114 and Ontos feature a similar concept featuring recoilless rifles and small track chassis. Although, admittedly, the real-world designs were intended for the assault role like the baby assault tank. This may not make the insect style we see in Frank's art more practical, but it does show that it wasn't too far from actual designs from that time period. Overall, I think this particular design is best left to the pages of a sci-fi novel or video game than the real-world battlefield, but I still adore it. For that reason, I want to take a second to do a bit of fantasizing and explore how I think these vehicles would be used on the battlefield. Sit back, maybe close your eyes, and let me paint you a picture of these vehicles in action. All is quiet as the American forces prepare to attack the fortifications constructed by the enemy forces. Pairs of tankers bicker as they find their way to their vehicles. Some show the signs of previous battles with numerous marks in the paint along the front where bullets have struck the armor. Some others feature small inscriptions showing enemy kills as well as the occasional scantily clad woman painted on the side. With a roar, these engines come to life and the weapons are loaded for battle. The gunners have learned from previous battles that it's best to save the shot from their cannon and mortar for when they really need it, as the machine guns will deal with most of what they face. With a slight crackle of static, the order comes across their radios to begin the attack, and the drivers push forward on their control sticks as the machines respond by lurching forward. As soon as they draw within sight of the enemy fortifications, the firefight begins. Artillery begins to rain down as the tanks make their way towards the objective of today's attack. A few quickly collapse into heaps on the ground as one of their tracks strike enemy mines, causing the mountings to snap off. The tanks still continue to fire in support of the assault though, making use of their mortars to suppress the enemy soldiers. As the tanks approach the first trench, they extend their rear wheels in preparation and open up with their flamethrowers, burning anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in the flames. Suddenly, one of the tanks bursts into flames from a well-placed shot into its midsection, which hits its ammunition, quickly igniting the vehicle. "AT gun, left!" yells one of the commanders over the radio, leading those near him to swing their guns on target. This is exactly what they've been saving their cannon shot for, and each tank fires into the foliage, concealing the foe. With no follow-up shot, it's clear that the target has been eliminated. With the enemy trench taken, the tanks move into covering positions to watch each other's back, preventing them from having explosives placed in their vulnerable struts. Having completed their mission, it is now just a matter of waiting for the foot soldiers to reach them. I hope you guys enjoyed that little bit of storytelling. If you did, please be sure to let me know in the comments. Videos on these wacky designs are super fun to make, and bringing them to life as much as I can is my goal, so I'd really love to hear what you think. With that being said, we've reached the end of today's video. If you did enjoy it, I highly recommend you follow up with the video on the submersible tank, also created by Frank Tinsley. Don't forget to try out Skillshare and send your crazy tank concepts in my Discord. Links to both of those are in the description of this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.